For nearly 10 years, the greatest warriors of Greece have fought beneath the walls of Troy. Thousands are dead, the city still stands, and now the entire war may be decided by the anger of one man. This is the Iliad by Homer. Achilles is the most feared warrior in the Greek army, powerful, proud, and almost impossible to defeat. But after being publicly humiliated by his own commander, he refuses to fight. As the Greeks begin to falter, Troy's greatest defender, Prince Hector, leads his soldiers onto the battlefield. Above them, the gods interfere, take sides and turn human lives into pieces in their own dangerous game. Pride becomes hatred. Honor leads men towards death. And when the war finally becomes personal for Achilles, nothing may be able to contain his fury. Before the story is over, heroes will fall, families will be shattered, and two enemies will meet in one of the most unforgettable moments in ancient literature. I'm Roger Braveheart, and a very warm welcome to the 33-Minute Stories channel. These stories are for anyone who has ever wished they had read the great classics at school, but never quite got around to it. Because the story is read to you, you can leave it playing in the background, carry on with another task, and simply listen as the violent, heroic, and tragic world of the Iliad unfolds. By the end, you'll understand the story well enough to enjoy it, remember it, and sound a little more well-read when it comes up in conversation. My challenge is to summarize this legendary ancient epic as an enjoyable story lasting approximately 33 minutes. Wish me luck. Okay, so without further delay, let's get cracking. The Great War at Troy has already dragged on for 9 long years when a bitter quarrel splits the Greek camp. A priest of Apollo comes to beg for the return of his captive daughter, but Agamemnon, the proud king of men, drives him away with insults. In revenge, the god sends a deadly plague sweeping through the army until a Greek seer reveals the true cause. Forced to give up his prize, Agamemnon seizes instead the captive maid awarded to Achilles, the greatest fighter among the Greeks. Burning with fury and shame, Achilles withdraws himself and his men from the fighting and pours out his grief to his sea goddess mother, who begs the father of the gods to turn the tide of battle against the Greeks so that they will feel the loss of her son. The request stirs jealousy and strife among the gods themselves. To torment the Greeks further, a false dream is sent to Agamemnon, promising him victory. He tests the weary army by proposing they sail home, and to his alarm the men rush joyfully to the ships. Only the cunning of one clever chief, aided by the war goddess, brings them back, and silences a loud, deformed common soldier who mocks the leaders. The forces are mustered and counted, nation by nation on both sides. When the armies at last face one another, Paris, the Trojan prince whose theft of Helen began the whole war, steps out to challenge the bravest Greek, then shrinks back in fear when Menelaus, the wronged husband, comes forward. Shamed by his brother Hector, Paris agrees to settle the war by single combat. Whoever wins shall keep Helen and all her treasure. From the walls of Troy, Helen watches and names the Greek captains for the aged King Priam, while solemn oaths and sacrifices seal the truce. The duel begins, and Menelaus quickly gains the upper hand, seizing Paris by the helmet and dragging him toward the Greek lines. But the goddess of love snatches her favourite away in a mist and sets him safely back in his chamber, then summons a reluctant Helen to his side. On the field, Menelaus rages in search of his vanished enemy, and the Greek king demands that the terms be honoured and Helen restored. For a moment it seems the long war might end in peace. The uneasy peace does not last. The gods debate the fate of Troy, and it is agreed that the war shall go on. The war goddess is sent down to break the truce, and she tempts a Trojan archer to loose an arrow at Menelaus, wounding him. A Greek healer tends the hurt, and the anger of the Greeks flares up again. Agamemnon strides through his ranks, praising the brave and shaming the fearful, urging his captains on as the two armies crash together in the first great battle. Warriors fall on both sides, and the plain runs with blood. Then the son of Tydeus, a fierce Greek fighter, is filled with fresh courage by the goddess of wisdom and performs astonishing deeds. He cuts down Trojans wherever he turns, and when a Trojan archer wounds him, the goddess heals him and grants him the power to see the gods walking the battlefield. She warns him to fight no immortal, except the goddess of love. When a Trojan hero and his ally rise against him, he slays the archer and wounds the goddess of love herself in the hand as she tries to carry her son from danger. The wounded goddess flees weeping to the heavens, and even the god of war is driven from the field, struck by the same daring Greek. Meanwhile, the gods withdraw for a time and the Greeks press hard. The chief Trojan seer urges Hector to return to the city and have the queen and the noble women pray to the war goddess for mercy, begging her to hold back the raging Greek. During the lull, a Greek and a Trojan warrior meet between the lines, and discovering an old bond of friendship between their families, exchange their armor rather than fight. Hector reaches the city, delivers his message to his mother, and goes to rouse Paris from his idle comfort back to the war. Then comes the poem's most tender moment. Hector finds his wife, the daughter of a slain king, waiting anxiously with their infant son. She begs him to stay within the walls and not throw away his life, and he answers with love and sorrow, knowing that Troy is doomed and that she may one day be led away a captive. He reaches for the child, who shrinks back frightened by the nodding crest of his helmet, and Hector laughs, lifts off the helmet, and prays that his son may grow greater than himself. With a heavy heart he returns to battle, and Paris hurries after him, eager at last to fight. Hector, back in the field, calls for a single Greek to face him in combat. The Greek leaders hesitate until the wronged husband Menelaus rashly steps forward and is held back for his own safety. At last, 9 chiefs offer themselves, and by lot the giant warrior Ajax is chosen. The 2 heroes fight fiercely with spear and stone until night falls and heralds part them, and they exchange gifts as a sign of mutual respect. The Trojans hold a council, where one wise elder urges them to give Helen back, but Paris will only offer the treasure he stole, not the woman. A truce is agreed so both sides may burn their dead, and the Greeks build a great wall and ditch to protect their ships. Then the father of the gods forbids any deity to help either side, and from the heights weighs the fates of the 2 armies in his golden scales. The balance sinks against the Greeks, and he hurls his thunder among them. Terror scatters the Greek ranks, and Hector drives them back toward their ships, boasting that he will burn the fleet. The war goddess and the queen of the gods try to help the Greeks, but are sternly turned back by a divine messenger. Night halts the fighting, and Hector camps his triumphant Trojans on the plain, their watchfires blazing like stars. Within the Greek camp, despair takes hold. Agamemnon himself proposes giving up and sailing home, but a bold young fighter rebukes him, and the aged counselor advises sending envoys to Achilles to beg his return. Agamemnon offers a vast treasure of gold, tripods, horses, and captive women, and swears to restore the maid he took, untouched, along with the hand of one of his own daughters and rich cities besides. The envoys, led by the cunning chief and the giant warrior, along with the old tutor of Achilles, cross to the tents by the sea. They find Achilles soothing his heart with a harp, singing of heroes. He welcomes them warmly, but when they lay out the offer, his answer is bitter and unyielding. No treasure can buy back his honor, he says, for gifts and life are not the same, and he means to sail home. The old tutor pleads with him, recalling how he raised him as a child, and warns him not to let pride destroy him. The giant warrior speaks plainly of friendship and duty. Achilles softens only a little, agreeing to stay but refusing to fight until the flames reach his own ships. The envoys return, and the Greeks hear the grim news in silence. Sleep will not come to Agamemnon as he broods over the danger to his army. He rouses the other leaders, and a night council decides to send scouts into the enemy camp to learn the Trojans' plans, The daring son of Tydeus takes on the task and chooses the cunning chief as his companion. On the same dark night, the Trojans send out a spy of their own, promising him the immortal horses of Achilles as his reward. The two Greeks capture this spy, wring the secrets of the Trojan camp from him, and then kill him. Guided by his words, they fall upon a newly arrived band of Thracian allies, slay their king and many of his men as they sleep, and drive off his famous white horses in triumph back to the ships. When day returns, the fighting begins anew. Agamemnon arms himself splendidly and leads the charge, cutting down Trojans and driving them back toward their walls. For a time, the Greeks carry all before them, until the king is wounded by a spear and forced to leave the field. At once the tide turns. Hector, urged on by the will of heaven, presses forward, and the Greeks begin to fall. The cunning chief and the son of Tydeus try to stem the rout, but the latter is wounded in the foot by an arrow from Paris, and must withdraw. The cunning chief is left alone, surrounded by enemies, wounded, and in great danger until the wronged husband and the giant warrior rescue him. Another Greek healer is struck by an arrow, and carried from the fight in the aged counselor's chariot. From his ship, Achilles watches the disaster unfold, and sends his dear friend Patroclus to learn who has been hurt. The old counselor receives Patroclus in his tent, and after recounting the sufferings of the day and the deeds of his own long-past youth, urges him to persuade Achilles to fight, or at least to let Patroclus go into battle wearing Achilles' armour to frighten the Trojans. On his way back, Patroclus meets a wounded chief and stops to tend his hurt. Meanwhile, the Trojans reach the Greek wall. On the advice of one wise Trojan, they leave their chariots and attack on foot in 5 divisions. An omen appears, an eagle carrying a serpent that stings it into dropping its prey, and the wise Trojan warns them to withdraw, but Hector angrily refuses. A Lycian ally breaches the wall, and Hector, hurling a great stone, smashes open one of the gates and leads his men roaring in among the ships. With the Trojans pouring over the wall, the god of the sea takes pity on the struggling Greeks. Disguising himself, he moves through the ranks, rousing the giant warrior and his companion, and breathing fresh strength into the weary fighters. The battle rages before the ships, and many heroes fall on both sides. The lord of Crete, though grieving over a wounded comrade, arms himself and performs great deeds, slaying several Trojans and standing firm against the enemy's fury. Hector still holds his ground against the giant warrior, until he is galled by the slingers and archers among the Greeks, and a wise Trojan advises calling a council of war. Meanwhile, the queen of the gods, seeing her husband's favour tilting toward Troy, forms a cunning plan to deceive him. She dresses herself in all her beauty, borrows the magic girdle of the goddess of love, and persuades the god of sleep to lull the father of the gods into slumber. Then she goes to the heights where he sits, and he, overcome by her charms, sinks into her embrace and falls asleep. While he lies unaware, the god of the sea seizes his chance and rallies the Greeks with new courage. Hector is struck to the ground by a great stone hurled by the giant warrior, and carried, senseless and bleeding, from the field. The Greeks press their advantage and drive the Trojans back in disorder. But when the father of the gods awakes and sees what has happened, he is furious at the trick. He rebukes the queen of the gods and sends her to summon the other deities. A divine messenger is sent to order the sea god to leave the battle, which he does at last, though with anger and reluctance. Another messenger goes to revive Hector, filling him once more with strength and courage. The god of light himself marches before the Trojan hero, carrying his dread shield, and turns the fortunes of the fight yet again. He breaks down much of the Greek wall, and the Trojans surge through, pressing toward the ships and trying to set them ablaze. The giant warrior alone stands against them, striking down all who come near with a great pole, defending the vessels with desperate courage. Patroclus, still tending the wounded chief, sees the ships in danger and hurries away to plead with Achilles. All around, the battle burns hotter than ever, the Greeks fighting for their very survival with the sea at their backs and the enemy before them. Patroclus comes to Achilles in tears, begging to be allowed to fight in his place. Achilles, moved by his friend's grief and by the danger to the Greeks, agrees. He lends Patroclus his own armour and his men, but warns him to do no more than drive the Trojans back from the ships, and on no account to pursue them to the walls of Troy or to face Hector. Clad in the shining armour, Patroclus leads the fierce fighters into battle. The Trojans, believing Achilles himself has returned, are seized with terror. Patroclus beats them back from the burning ships, slays a Lycian ally who is a son of the father of the gods, and drives the enemy in flight across the plain. But in the heat of victory he forgets Achilles' warning, and pursues the Trojans to the very walls of Troy. There the god of light strikes him, dazing him, and knocking away his helmet and armour. A Trojan wounds him from behind, and Hector, seeing him defenceless, drives a spear through his body. As he dies, Patroclus foretells that Hector too will soon fall. A furious struggle breaks out over the body. The wronged husband slays the Trojan who first wounded Patroclus, and, with the giant warrior, guards the corpse against the enemy. Hector strips Achilles' armour from the fallen friend and puts it on himself. At last, after a desperate fight, the Greeks bear the body back to the ships. When Achilles hears that his dearest friend is dead, his grief is overwhelming. He casts himself upon the ground, covers his head with dust, and cries out in anguish. His sea goddess mother hears him from the deep and comes with her sisters to comfort him. She warns him that if he slays Hector, his own death will soon follow, but Achilles no longer cares to live now that his friend is gone. He resolves to take revenge, though it cost him his life. Since his armour is lost, his mother promises to bring him new armour made by the smith god. Meanwhile, the queen of the gods sends a messenger urging Achilles to show himself at the trench, and though unarmed, he rises and gives a great shout that fills the Trojans with terror and allows the Greeks to bear the body to safety. His mother goes to the smith god's dwelling, where the wonderful workshop is described, and there is forged a marvellous shield covered with images of the whole world, along with the rest of the glorious armour for her son. His sea goddess mother brings the new armour to Achilles and preserves the body of his friend from decay. Achilles calls the army together and formally sets aside his long anger. He and Agamemnon are reconciled before all the Greeks, and the king admits he was driven by a blindness sent from heaven and offers the promised gifts. But Achilles cares nothing for treasure now, wanting only to fight. The cunning chief persuades him to let the men eat first, since strength comes from food and the gifts are brought to Achilles' tent, along with the captive maid, who weeps over the body of the dead friend. Achilles refuses all food, given wholly to grief, until the war goddess secretly strengthens him. He arms himself in the shining armour, and as he takes up his great spear, he speaks to his immortal horses and reproaches them with the death of his friend. One horse, given voice for a moment, foretells that his master too is doomed to die, but Achilles, unmoved, rushes to battle. The father of the gods now allows the deities to take part in the war once more, and they descend to aid one side or the other. Achilles seeks only Hector, but the god of light urges a Trojan hero forward to face him. The two fight, and the Trojan is saved from death only by the god of the sea. Achilles then falls upon the Trojans in a great slaughter, driving them before him toward the city, and comes near to killing Hector, but the god of light hides Hector away in a cloud. Achilles turns his fury upon the fleeing Trojans, and many are cut down. He drives a great crowd of them into the river, killing so many that the waters are choked with the dead. He takes 12 young Trojans alive to sacrifice at his friend's funeral pyre, and slays a Trojan prince who begs for mercy. The river god himself rises in anger and attacks Achilles with all his waves, nearly overwhelming the hero, until the gods come to his aid, and the smith god turns his fires against the flood, drying up the river until it yields. This done, The gods fall to quarrelling and fighting among themselves. Achilles continues the slaughter, driving the rest of the Trojans toward the city gates. One brave Trojan makes a stand, but the god of light carries him away in a cloud, and taking on his shape, lures Achilles in pursuit, giving the fleeing Trojans time to escape into the safety of their walls. With the Trojans safe inside the city, Hector alone remains outside, fixed by fate before the gates, determined to defend his people. From the walls, his aged father Priam begs him to come in and not throw away his life, and his mother the queen adds her tears and pleas, but Hector will not yield. Yet when Achilles comes on, blazing like a star of doom, Hector's courage fails him, and he flees. Achilles pursues him 3 times around the walls of Troy. The gods watch and debate his fate, and at last the war goddess descends to help Achilles. She deludes Hector by taking the shape of one of his brothers, so that he turns to stand and fight, believing he has support. The 2 heroes meet, and Achilles drives his spear through Hector's throat. As he dies, Hector begs that his body be given back to his family for burial, but Achilles refuses with savage words, and foretells that Hector's own death shall soon be avenged upon him. Achilles strips the armour, then in cruel triumph pierces Hector's ankles, binds him to his chariot, and drags the body through the dust in sight of his grieving parents, and of Andromache, who faints upon the wall when she sees her dead husband so dishonoured. Her lament for Hector and for their fatherless child is bitter and heartbreaking. Then Achilles turns to honour his own dead friend. The body of Patroclus is mourned, and his ghost appears to Achilles in the night, asking for the rites of burial so that his spirit may find rest. Wood is gathered, and a great funeral pyre is built. Achilles cuts off his hair as an offering, sacrifices animals, and last of all the 12 Trojan captives, and sets the pyre ablaze. He pours libations to the winds, which rise to fan the flames. When the fire has burned all night, the bones are gathered into a golden urn, and a tomb is raised. Then Achilles holds funeral games in his friend's honour, with rich prizes. There is a chariot race full of rivalry and dispute, a brutal boxing match, a wrestling bout between the giant warrior and the cunning chief, a foot race, a duel in armour, a contest of throwing a great iron weight, an archery match at a tethered dove, and a spear throwing. Through the games, Achilles shows a generous and courteous spirit, honouring the aged counsellor, and settling quarrels with fairness, his fury for a time set aside. For 12 days Achilles cannot rest, still grieving for his friend and still dragging Hector's body around the tomb each morning. But the god of light guards the corpse from harm and decay, keeping it whole and fair. At last, the gods, moved to pity, decide that Hector's body must be returned. The sea goddess mother is sent to persuade her son to give it up, and a messenger is sent to old King Priam to urge him to go in person to Achilles and ransom his son. Despite the fearful pleas of his queen, who dreads the murder of her children, Priam makes ready. Encouraged by a favourable omen from heaven, he loads a wagon with rich gifts and sets out across the plain in the night, guided by his herald. The messenger god comes to him in the shape of a young man and leads him safely through the sleeping Greek camp, past the guards, to the tent of Achilles. There Priam does what no one thought possible. He enters, casts himself at Achilles' feet, and kisses the terrible hands that killed so many of his sons. He begs for the body of Hector, bidding Achilles think of his own aged father far away, and pity a father's grief. The words touch Achilles deeply, and both men weep together, one for his dead friend and his father, the other for his son. Achilles raises the old king gently, speaks to him of the sorrows that heaven deals out to all mortals, and consents to give back the body. He has it washed and covered, lifts it onto the wagon himself, and asks his friend's forgiveness for yielding. He shares food with the aged king, and the two gaze in wonder at one another. Priam asks for a truce so that Troy may bury Hector, and Achilles grants 12 days of peace. The old king sleeps in the porch, but the messenger god wakes him in the night and leads him safely home before dawn. As the sad procession nears the city, Hector's sister is the first to see it, and the whole city pours out in grief. The body is brought to the palace, and there his widow, his mother, and Helen each lament over him with sorrowful words. Then the Trojans fell timber, build a great pyre, and burn the body. They gather his bones into a golden urn, raise a tomb, and hold a solemn funeral feast. So the mighty Hector is laid to rest, and the poem ends in mourning and honour. When I look at this great story, I think its true subject is not the whole war, but a single terrible force in the human heart, and that is anger. The poem announces from its very first lines that it will sing of the wrath of Achilles and of the countless woes it brought. And I believe that is exactly what it does. It shows me how one man's wounded pride and one king's arrogant greed can spread ruin far beyond themselves, killing brave men who had no part in the quarrel. I think the story is drawing my attention to how personal resentment, when it is nursed and cherished, becomes a kind of poison that harms not only the one who feels it, but everyone around him. I also feel the book is holding up a mirror to the cost of glory. These men chase honour and fame above life itself, and yet the poem never lets me forget the price. Again and again a warrior is named, his father and homeland recalled, and then he is cut down in an instant. To me, this suggests the author wants me to feel the weight of each death, not to cheer it, and to see how thin the line is between triumph and grief. The tender scene of Hector's farewell to his wife and child, set against the slaughter, seems deliberately placed to make me ask what all this fighting really destroys. I think the story is highlighting the tragedy that falls upon women, children, and the old when men make war. There is something else I feel strongly here, and that is the smallness of mortals before fate and the gods. The deities meddle, quarrel, and take sides, and even the greatest hero knows his death is fixed. The poem seems to be telling me that no strength or pride can outrun destiny, and that this shared mortality is what ought to bind human beings together. That is why the ending moves me so much. When the old king kneels before the man who killed his son, and the two of them weep together, I think the author is showing me the one thing greater than rage, and that is pity. In that shared sorrow, enemies recognize each other as fellow sufferers. So I believe the lasting message is that anger and pride bring endless woe, that glory is bought with terrible loss, and that compassion, when it finally breaks through, is the truest greatness a person can reach. The poem does not preach this, but it lets me feel it, and that is why it has lasted so long. Thank you for staying till the end of the Iliad. You obviously are a glutton for punishment. Please hit the like icon if you thought this video deserves it, so other people get to see it. Let me know in the comments which book you would like me to read to you next. Now YouTube have put on screen a channel subscribe icon, and below it my latest video for you to check out. See you next time